I had a crazy uncle who believed that every word of the Bible was literally true, including the marginal notes. And so whatever date it said in the marginal notes that the world was created in 4004 BC, and he believed it as the Word of God. Until one day he was reading, I think, a passage in the book of Proverbs, and found a naughty word in the Bible. And from that time on he was through with it. You know, how Protestant can you get?
This light-hearted reflection highlights a deeper issue Watts often explored: the human tendency to seek certainty in sacred texts, even at the cost of critical thinking. But beyond such literal interpretations lies a much broader and more profound search. The search for meaning beyond the immediate, for connections between the mundane and the divine. At the heart of human existence lies an ancient and ever-persistent quest, the search for meaning beyond the immediacy of our lives. From the dawn of civilization, we have looked up to the stars, inward to the recesses of our minds, and outward to sacred texts and symbols, hoping to grasp that elusive thread connecting us to something greater than ourselves. The human spirit, as if driven by an inner call, continually reaches for a sense of belonging in the vastness of the cosmos. Among the many ways we have tried to answer this call, religion has stood as one of the most potent forces, creating pathways between the seen and unseen, between the mind and the infinite mystery of existence. Alan Watts often reflected on this deeply human impulse, focusing not only on the spiritual dimension, but also on the cultural and historical forces that shape how we understand the divine. For Watts, religion, particularly the creation of sacred texts like the Bible, was not just the result of divine intervention. Instead, he saw these texts as products of their time, shaped by human consciousness, political realities, and the institutions that codified them. He noted that Westerners owe much of their understanding of the Bible to the early Catholic Church, which played a pivotal role in determining which scriptures would be considered authoritative. This process was not purely spiritual, but deeply intertwined with human decisions made at councils and synods, like the Synod of Jamnia and the Synod of Rome. This raises profound questions for the seeker of truth. What is divine inspiration if it passes through the hands of humans? What becomes of truth when it is mediated through individuals whose perceptions are shaped by time, language, and culture? These questions are not meant to diminish the sacredness of religious texts, but to invite a deeper reflection on their nature. Watts prompts us to consider that perhaps what we accept as divine is not handed down from on high, but rather arises through the human experience of the divine, a process where the sacred and the ordinary, the eternal and the temporal, meet. For those deeply embedded in religious traditions, the notion of divine inspiration often comes with the assumption of literal truth, an external authority dictating words from beyond the veil of human consciousness. Yet, Watts encourages us to reconsider this view, not by rejecting the idea of inspiration, but by expanding our understanding of how it manifests. In his eyes, inspiration is less like a lightning bolt from an omnipotent deity and more like the quiet flow of a river, moving through the channels of human consciousness, touching not just the mind, but the soul. Divine inspiration, he believed, is not a set of laws or commandments etched in stone, but an encounter with the mystery of existence itself, a mystery that transcends words, symbols, and doctrines. Here, Watts draws us into the realm of mystical insight, where truth is not something to be heard or read, but something to be felt in the core of one's being. It is an experience where the boundaries between self and the universe dissolve, revealing a profound sense of oneness. This is not an intellectual exercise or a doctrinal affirmation. It is a visceral realization that all is one, that the divine, in whatever form we perceive it, is not separate from us, but flows through all things. This sense of interconnectedness goes beyond Christianity, Buddhism, or any other religious path. It touches the very heart of what it means to exist as a conscious being in a conscious universe. In such moments, Watts suggests, we see God not as an external figure, but as an intrinsic part of everything around us. These moments of clarity are fleeting, like sparks of light in the vast darkness of ordinary perception, but they leave a lasting impression, a recognition that the true nature of divine inspiration lies not in words, but in the deep, unspoken connection between all things. Mystics across time and traditions have spoken of this experience in different ways. The Sufi poet Kabir, for example, saw the divine in every face he encountered. In Watts's view, this is the truest form of divine inspiration, a sense of connection to something eternal and indescribable, something that cannot be confined to the doctrines of any one religion. But this experience of oneness, however profound, is never experienced in a vacuum. It is always filtered through the lens of the culture, language, and personal experiences of the one receiving it. Watts was keenly aware that the way we express the divine is colored by the paradigms we inherit. Consider someone raised in the Bible Belt of America who has a mystical experience of oneness. They may interpret this experience through the framework they know best, perhaps identifying themselves as Jesus Christ. This is not a delusion, but an expression of the cultural and religious symbols they have internalized. In another cultural context, that same experience might be expressed differently. In India, the experience of cosmic unity might lead one to say, "I am Brahman," or "I am Shiva." Both statements, despite their differing religious frameworks, point to the same underlying truth, the realization of unity with the divine. Here, Watts invites us to recognize the limitations of language and cultural conditioning. Words, after all, are merely symbols, imperfect attempts to describe the indescribable. Whether we speak of God, Brahman, the Tao, or the universe, the essence remains the same. What matters is not the label, but the lived experience of oneness. Watts is particularly critical of the tendency to mistake the symbols for the reality they represent. Just as a map is not the territory, the words and stories we use to describe the divine are not the divine itself. This is why Watts urges us to look beyond the surface of religious texts. The Bible, the Vedas, the Quran, all of these are maps pointing toward the same fundamental truth. But if we cling too tightly to the map, we risk missing the territory it points to, the direct, unmediated experience of the divine. In light of this understanding, Watts offers a reinterpretation of figures like Jesus of Nazareth. Rather than seeing Jesus as the unique Son of God, Watts suggests that Jesus, like many enlightened beings throughout history, had a profound experience of cosmic consciousness. This experience shattered the illusion of individual identity and revealed to Jesus the deep interconnectedness of all things. In that moment, Jesus would have realized that he was not separate from the divine, but an expression of it, just as we all are. However, because of the cultural and religious context in which Jesus lived, he expressed this experience through the language and symbols available to him. He spoke of the kingdom of heaven, of God the Father, and of his unique relationship with the divine. But Watts invites us to see that what Jesus was really pointing to was something far more universal, a truth that transcends the particularities of any one religion. The divine that Jesus experienced is the same divine that mystics and sages throughout history, from all cultures and religions, have touched. Watts warns us that if we cling too tightly to the words and stories of Scripture, we risk missing the deeper truth they are trying to convey. The Bible, like all sacred texts, is a map, not the territory. It points us toward the experience of the divine, but it is not the divine itself. To truly understand Jesus' message, Watts encourages us to look beyond the literal interpretations and to seek the universal truth that lies beneath, a truth that transcends the boundaries of religion and culture. To grasp the essence of divine inspiration, we must move beyond the limitations of words and doctrines. This is where Watts's concept of cosmic consciousness becomes especially relevant. He speaks of a direct experience of the universe as an interconnected whole, a realization that we are not separate individuals, but manifestations of a single, boundless reality. In moments of deep insight, whether during meditation, prayer, or moments of spontaneous clarity, we may feel this connection profoundly. The boundaries between self and other, between inner and outer, begin to dissolve. As Watts describes, it is as if the ego drops away, and we are left with the pure experience of being. In these moments, we are not merely playing a role in life. We are life. Everything we experience, the rustling of leaves in the wind, the sound of a distant stream, the rise and fall of our breath, is part of a grand cosmic dance, and we are both the dancer and the dance. This, for Watts, is the true nature of divine inspiration. It is not a message from an external force, but a deep knowing that arises from within, a knowing that we are intimately connected to the universe, that we are the universe experiencing itself. This kind of inspiration has moved poets, artists, and sages throughout the ages, and it continues to call to those who are willing to listen. At the core of human suffering lies a persistent illusion, the belief that we are separate from the world around us, isolated in our individual identities. From a young age, we are taught to identify ourselves as distinct beings, independent from the vast, interconnected whole of life. This sense of I and me is reinforced by societal structures, religious teachings, and cultural narratives that emphasize duality, good and evil, right and wrong, self and other. This dualistic thinking creates boundaries in our minds, convincing us that we are alone, disconnected from the universe that gave birth to us. Alan Watts consistently reminded his audience that this sense of separateness is a grand illusion. In reality, we are all part of the same unfolding process, the same energy that manifests itself as stars, rivers, trees, and human beings. The boundaries we perceive, between ourselves and others, between life and death, between the sacred and the profane, are not as real as they seem. They are constructs of the mind, reinforced by language and culture, but they do not reflect the true nature of existence. To break through this illusion is to experience a profound liberation. When we dissolve the veil of separateness, we begin to see the world in an entirely new way. No longer do we feel isolated or alienated from life. Instead, we feel deeply connected to everything around us. Our sense of self expands to include not just our body and mind, but the entire cosmos. We realize that we are not just individuals navigating a world of things, but that we are the world itself, experiencing itself through the lens of consciousness. This realization is not merely a comforting idea. It is a lived experience, one that transcends the limitations of thought. It is what mystics from all traditions have called awakening or enlightenment, a moment when the illusion of separateness falls away, revealing the oneness that lies beneath. However, Watts was careful to point out that the ego, or sense of separateness, is not inherently bad. In fact, the ego serves a necessary purpose in the evolution of consciousness. It is through the development of a strong sense of individuality that we are able to navigate the complexities of life, to make choices, and to grow. The ego is like a tool that allows us to function in the world, to interact with others, and to experience life from a unique perspective. The trouble arises when we become too identified with the ego, when we mistake the ego for the entirety of who we are. The ego is, by its nature, a limited construct. It is built from our personal history, our memories, our desires, and our fears. It sees itself as separate from the rest of the world, which inevitably leads to a sense of conflict and isolation. The more we identify with the ego, the more we feel cut off from the deeper reality of our interconnectedness with all things. Yet, as Watts and other spiritual teachers remind us, the ego is not the end of the story. It is a necessary illusion, one that we must eventually see through in order to awaken to a more expansive truth. The process of spiritual awakening is often described as piercing the veil, or seeing through the illusion. And it is this illusion of ego that we must ultimately transcend. When we do, we realize that the ego is not who we truly are. It is simply a mask we wear in order to play our role in the world. Our true self is much larger, much more profound than the ego could ever comprehend. At the heart of many spiritual traditions lies the experience of ego death, a moment in which the individual self dissolves, leaving behind only pure awareness. Watts spoke often of this phenomenon, describing it as a radical shift in consciousness, one that completely changes how we experience the world and ourselves. In the state of ego dissolution, the boundaries that normally separate self from other fall away, and what remains is a direct, unfiltered experience of oneness. For those who have undergone this shift, the world is no longer seen as a collection of separate objects or people. Instead, everything is perceived as interconnected, flowing, and inseparable from the whole. This is not an abstract or intellectual understanding. It is a direct, embodied experience. In these moments, one feels deeply at home in the universe, knowing that there is no distinction between the self and the cosmos. The boundary between the observer and the observed, between subject and object, dissolves entirely. This kind of mystical experience has been described in various ways across different spiritual traditions. In Hinduism, it is referred to as the realization of Brahman, the ultimate reality that pervades everything. In Buddhism, it is the attainment of nirvana, the cessation of the illusion of the separate self. In Christian mysticism, it is often described as union with God, and in Taoism, it is the experience of living in harmony with the Tao, the fundamental flow of the universe. Regardless of the terminology used, the essence of these experiences is the same, a direct encounter with the oneness of all things. This oneness is not something that can be grasped through logic or reason. It can only be felt, known, and lived. When the ego dissolves, we become aware of the deeper truth that has always been there, that we are not separate from the universe, but are, in fact, expressions of it. How then do we cultivate this awareness? How do we begin to break down the illusion of separateness and open ourselves to the experience of cosmic consciousness? Throughout history, mystics and spiritual seekers have explored countless paths to awakening. Some have sought enlightenment through rigorous spiritual disciplines, while others have experienced spontaneous moments of grace that forever changed their perception of reality. One of the most universal practices for awakening to this deeper truth is meditation. In meditation, we quiet the incessant chatter of the mind, allowing space for a deeper awareness to emerge. Meditation is not about achieving a particular state or reaching a goal. Rather, it is about letting go of the ego's constant striving and allowing oneself to simply be. In this state of pure presence, the boundaries of the self begin to dissolve, and we start to feel the flow of life in a new way. We become attuned to the deeper rhythms of existence, to the subtle currents of the universe that are always moving through us, even if we are not always aware of them. Watts often emphasized that meditation is not an act of doing, but a state of being. It is not about controlling the mind or forcing a particular experience. Rather, it is about letting go of control altogether. Meditation is an invitation to rest in the natural flow of life, to surrender to the mystery of existence. In this state of surrender, we begin to dissolve the boundaries of the ego, and the deeper awareness of our oneness with the universe begins to emerge. Yet, meditation is not the only path. For some, the experience of cosmic consciousness arises through moments of deep connection with nature, art, or love. These moments, though fleeting, offer glimpses of a greater reality, a reality that is always present, even if we are not always aware of it. Watts often spoke of these moments as windows into the divine, opportunities to step beyond the limitations of the ego and touch the infinite. At the core of Watts's teachings is the idea that the experience of cosmic consciousness transcends all religious boundaries. While different traditions may use different words and symbols to describe the experience, the underlying reality is the same. Watts famously referred to religions as fingers pointing at the moon. The fingers are not the moon itself, and to focus too much on the finger is to miss the beauty and mystery of the moon. In this metaphor, the moon represents the direct experience of oneness, the realization that we are all part of the same cosmic flow. Religions, with their doctrines, rituals, and stories, are simply tools that point us toward this experience. But the experience itself is universal, and it transcends the particularities of any one tradition. This understanding leads to a profound sense of openness and tolerance. When we recognize that all spiritual traditions are pointing to the same underlying truth, we can appreciate the wisdom of each without feeling the need to choose one over the other. We can see the beauty and the diversity of human spirituality, while also recognizing the deep commonality that unites us all. Whether we speak of the Christian idea of the kingdom of heaven, the Hindu concept of Brahman, or the Taoist notion of the Tao, we are ultimately talking about the same fundamental truth. The universe is a single, interconnected whole, and we are all expressions of that wholeness. Watts invites us to explore this common ground, to see beyond the surface distinctions of creed and doctrine, and to tap into the universal truths that unite us all. This approach does not require us to abandon our own religious or spiritual traditions, but encourages us to see them in a broader, more inclusive context. When we do this, we can begin to appreciate the richness and diversity of human spirituality, while also recognizing the deep commonality that binds us together. When we awaken to the truth of our interconnectedness with the universe, an inevitable realization follows. Love, in its purest form, is the natural expression of cosmic consciousness. This love transcends the ordinary human experience of love, which is often tied to attachment, desire, and personal gain. It is not the love of the ego, which seeks to possess and control, but a deeper, more expansive love that flows from the awareness that all beings share the same essence. Alan Watts often spoke of love as the manifestation of unity, a force that arises naturally when we come to see that there is no real separation between ourselves and others. In this state of awakened consciousness, we can no longer view people as isolated individuals with competing interests. Instead, we begin to perceive others as reflections of ourselves, as expressions of the same divine consciousness that animates all life. This shift in perspective transforms our relationships and interactions. Rather than approaching others from a place of fear, competition, or judgment, we engage with them from a place of deep empathy and understanding. Their joys become our joys. Their suffering becomes our suffering. This is not a theoretical understanding, but a lived reality, an experience of love that flows effortlessly from our awareness of oneness. Watts often drew on the teachings of mystics like Kabir and Rumi to illustrate this point. Both poets spoke of a love so vast that it dissolved all boundaries, a love that recognized no distinctions between lover and beloved. In this state of love, we come to see that the divine is not some distant, external force, but is present in every person, in every moment, in every breath. This is the love that binds all things together, the love that moves through the cosmos, the love that is the cosmos. Such love is often described as unconditional because it does not depend on external circumstances. It is not something we do or give to others. Rather, it is something we experience when we recognize the interconnectedness of all life. It flows through us naturally, as effortlessly as breathing, because it is the very essence of who we are. In this way, love becomes not just an emotion or a virtue, but the fundamental nature of existence itself. This deep recognition of interconnectedness often gives rise to a powerful impulse, the desire to help others awaken to the same realization. In many spiritual traditions, this impulse is seen as a natural extension of enlightenment. In Mahayana Buddhism, for instance, the figure of the Bodhisattva represents the ideal of an awakened being who, out of compassion, chooses to remain in the world to guide others toward liberation. The Bodhisattva does not seek personal salvation or enlightenment for themselves alone, but vows to assist all beings in their journey toward awakening. This path is not driven by a sense of duty or obligation, but by the profound love that arises from seeing all beings as part of oneself. It is the recognition that no one can truly be free until everyone is free, for we are all interconnected parts of the same whole. Watts often compared this path to the role of a teacher or guide, not someone who imposes their views on others, but someone who holds space for others to discover the truth for themselves. The Bodhisattva's role is not to save others, but to awaken them to the reality that they too are expressions of the divine. In this way, the Bodhisattva embodies the ultimate expression of love, a selfless dedication to the awakening of all beings, born from the recognition that the liberation of one is inextricably tied to the liberation of all. This vision of love and service is not confined to Buddhism. Across spiritual traditions, we find the idea that love, when fully realized, leads naturally to a desire to help others. Whether it is expressed through the Christian ideal of agape, selfless love, the Hindu concept of seva, service, or the Taoist principle of wu-wei, action without attachment, the message is the same. True love flows from the understanding of our interconnectedness and seeks to uplift all beings. While the journey of awakening often begins as a deeply personal experience, Alan Watts saw it as part of a larger, collective process. Just as individuals undergo a transformation in their understanding of themselves and their place in the universe, so too is humanity as a whole, moving toward a collective awakening. This shift is not merely an abstract ideal, but a tangible process that is already unfolding in our time. Watts believed that humanity is in the midst of a great transition, one in which the old paradigms of separation, competition, and materialism are gradually giving way to a new understanding of interconnectedness, cooperation, and spiritual awareness. He often spoke of this shift as a natural evolution of consciousness. Just as individuals awaken to their true nature, so too does society evolve toward a more enlightened way of being. This collective awakening is not without its challenges. The old systems of power and control, rooted in the ego's desire for dominance, resist change. Just as the individual ego resists its own dissolution, so too do the structures of society resist the transformation that is taking place. This resistance often manifests as conflict, fear, and division, as the old ways of thinking clash with the emerging awareness of our interconnectedness. But despite these challenges, Watts believed that the momentum of this collective awakening is unstoppable. More and more people are beginning to question the old ways of living and are seeking deeper connections with themselves, with others, and with the natural world. They are recognizing that the systems of separation and exploitation that have defined much of human history are no longer sustainable. The dawning realization is that we must live in harmony with each other and the earth if we are to survive and thrive as a species. This shift in consciousness is often described in spiritual literature as the birth of a new humanity or the dawning of a new age. While such phrases may sound grandiose, they point to a very real process that is unfolding in our time. Humanity is being called to awaken to its true potential, to move beyond the limitations of the ego and the illusion of separateness, and to embrace a new way of being in the world, one that honors the interconnectedness of all life. As we contemplate the unfolding of cosmic consciousness, both individually and collectively, the question naturally arises: how can we align ourselves with this process? How can we, as individuals, actively participate in the awakening that Alan Watts so often spoke of? And how can we live the wisdom of cosmic consciousness in our daily lives? The answer as Watts often suggested, lies not in grand gestures or in trying to change the world overnight, but in small, consistent practices that cultivate deeper awareness and connection. Spiritual awakening is not something that happens all at once. It is a gradual process, a shift in perspective that grows stronger as we engage with life more mindfully, more compassionately, and more consciously. One of the most powerful ways to support this awakening is through the practice of mindfulness. Mindfulness allows us to slow down and become fully present in the moment, freeing us from the constant distractions of the ego and its endless concerns. When we practice mindfulness, we begin to notice the subtle ways in which the ego operates. Its need for control, its fear of uncertainty, its tendency to create divisions and separations. In becoming aware of these patterns, we gain the power to release them, to step outside the narrow confines of egoic consciousness, and to connect with the deeper flow of life. Watts often spoke about the importance of living in the present moment, emphasizing that the present is the only point of true power. The past is gone, the future is uncertain, but the present is alive with possibility. In the now, we can tune into the rhythms of the universe, aligning ourselves with the natural flow of existence. The practice of mindfulness helps us cultivate this awareness, allowing us to engage with life from a place of clarity, openness, and connection. Beyond mindfulness, another essential practice for integrating the wisdom of cosmic consciousness is self-reflection. Through introspection, we come to understand the inner workings of our minds, our beliefs, and our patterns. Self-reflection provides a space where we can examine our thoughts and behaviors, allowing us to identify the areas where we are still clinging to the illusion of separateness. This reflective process helps us to gradually dismantle the ego's stronghold, revealing the deeper truths that lie beneath our conditioned ways of thinking. When we act from a state of cosmic consciousness, our actions are more effective, more in tune with the needs of the moment. We are no longer driven by fear, anxiety, or the need to control. Instead, we act from a place of clarity, purpose, and love. In practical terms, living the wisdom of cosmic consciousness involves cultivating certain practices that support this deeper awareness. Meditation, as mentioned earlier, is one of the most powerful tools for quieting the mind and attuning ourselves to the flow of life. Through meditation, we learn to observe our thoughts and emotions without becoming attached to them, creating space for a deeper awareness to emerge. But meditation is not the only path. Spending time in nature can also help us reconnect with the rhythms of the universe. When we immerse ourselves in the natural world, whether by walking through a forest, sitting by the ocean, or simply observing the sky, we begin to feel the interconnectedness of all life. Nature, in its stillness and beauty, reminds us of the cosmic flow that moves through all things, including ourselves. Another important practice is cultivating love and compassion in our relationships. As we awaken to the truth of our interconnectedness, we begin to see others not as separate individuals with competing interests, but as expressions of the same divine consciousness that flows through us. This realization transforms the way we relate to others, allowing us to approach each interaction with empathy, understanding, and love. Finally, living the wisdom of cosmic consciousness means letting go of old habits, beliefs, and attachments that no longer serve us. This process of letting go can be difficult, as it often requires us to confront the fears and insecurities that the ego clings to. But as we release these attachments, we open ourselves to new possibilities, trusting that the universe will guide us toward a more authentic and fulfilling way of being. Once we have established practices of mindfulness and self-reflection, the next step is to bring this awareness into our daily lives. Cosmic consciousness is not an abstract concept to be contemplated only in meditation or during moments of spiritual insight. It is meant to be lived, to be embodied in every action, every interaction, and every decision we make. Watts believed that the key to living in alignment with cosmic wisdom was simplicity. This simplicity is not about material deprivation or withdrawing from the world. Rather, it is about returning to the essence of things. It is about recognizing that life itself, in its most natural state, is already in harmony with the universe. We do not need to force or manipulate life to achieve this harmony. Instead, we need only to let go of the complexities and attachments that the ego creates and allow life to flow as it naturally does. In practical terms, living simply means cultivating a lifestyle that honors our connection to the earth and to each other. It means reducing unnecessary consumption, letting go of excess material possessions, and choosing to live in a way that is sustainable and in balance with the natural world. It also means cultivating relationships that are grounded in authenticity, compassion, and mutual respect, rather than in ego-driven needs for validation or control. Another way to align our lives with cosmic wisdom is through conscious work. Whether we are artists, teachers, entrepreneurs, or caretakers, we can approach our work with a sense of purpose and intention, seeing it as an expression of our unique gifts and talents. When we bring cosmic consciousness into our work, we recognize that our efforts are not just for personal gain, but are contributions to the greater whole. This shift in perspective allows us to find deeper meaning and fulfillment in our daily tasks, knowing that we are participating in the unfolding of the universe's creative process. In this sense, service becomes an integral part of spiritual practice. Service does not need to take the form of grand charitable acts or large-scale projects. It can be as simple as showing kindness to a stranger, offering support to a friend, or practicing patience with those who challenge us. Every small act of service is a way to affirm our interconnectedness with all beings and to embody the love and compassion that arise naturally from cosmic consciousness. Watts frequently reminded his audiences that suffering is an inevitable part of life, something we cannot avoid, but something that can become a profound catalyst for growth and transformation. When we view suffering through the lens of cosmic consciousness, it takes on a different meaning. It is no longer something to be resisted or feared, but something to be embraced as part of the alchemical process of spiritual evolution. In many ways, suffering acts as a form of spiritual purification. It strips away the layers of egoic attachment, forcing us to confront the impermanence of the material world and the limitations of our control. In the midst of suffering, we are often brought to our knees, humbled by life's unpredictability. Yet, it is in these moments of vulnerability that the greatest insights often arise. We come to see that our suffering, while painful, is not something separate from the cosmic flow. It is part of the very fabric of existence, a necessary experience that opens us to deeper truths. Watts frequently referenced the teachings of Buddhism in this regard, particularly the Buddha's insight that suffering arises from attachment, our desire to hold on to things as they are, our clinging to permanence in an impermanent world. When we recognize that suffering is a natural result of this attachment, we can begin to let go. In doing so, we free ourselves from the cycles of pain that the ego creates, and we open ourselves to the peace and liberation that come from living in harmony with the impermanence of all things. However, Watts was careful to point out that letting go of attachment does not mean becoming indifferent or detached from life. Rather, it means embracing life fully, with all its joys and sorrows, without trying to control or resist what happens. This is the essence of what he called the wisdom of insecurity, the understanding that life is inherently uncertain, but that this uncertainty is not something to be feared. Instead, it is the source of life's beauty and mystery, an ever-changing dance in which we are both participants and observers. In the end, the journey toward cosmic consciousness is not about achieving a final destination or reaching a state of perfection. It is about learning to live in harmony with the flow of the universe, to recognize that we are not separate from life, but are intimately woven into its fabric. This realization, that we are one with the cosmos, brings with it a profound sense of peace, freedom, and joy that transcends the ordinary concerns of the ego. As Alan Watts often reminded his listeners, the universe is a vast mystery, one that cannot be fully understood or explained through the mind alone, but one that can be experienced directly. When we surrender to this mystery, when we let go of our need for control and certainty, we open ourselves to the profound beauty and wisdom that lie at the heart of existence. This act of surrender is not about passivity, but about trust. Trusting that life, in all its complexity, knows what it is doing, and that we are part of this grand unfolding. Through this journey, we come to understand that we are not merely beings within the universe, but expressions of the universe itself. Every breath, every thought, every experience is part of the larger cosmic process. When we truly grasp this, the boundaries between self and other dissolve, and we awaken to the interconnectedness of all things. In this state of awareness, love flows effortlessly, as naturally as the breath itself. We begin to see others not as separate individuals, but as reflections of the same divine consciousness that flows through us. This is the ultimate realization of cosmic consciousness, that we are the universe, experiencing itself in human form, and that every moment offers us an opportunity to awaken to the infinite beauty and wonder of our true nature.